We continue our conversation now with 12th District Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman. The Democratic Party, it seemed like a while there was this talk about a blue wave and that the midterm elections, you were going to take the House back, and it's gotten closer in the polls. It seems to get closer and closer and closer. And one of the attacks on the Democratic Party is right now that there's not a message except for we don't like Donald Trump. Except that you seem to just vocalize a very strong message a moment ago. Is it your hopes that Democrats across the country run on that?
No, well, I think, well, first of all, you can't run away from the whole issue of common sense gun safety legislation. And even the young kids from Parkland and those that have joined them have made it very clear that they're going to stand up and they're going to demand some accountability on the part of legislators. So that's not just, legislators in blue and Democratic districts, that's the legislators across this country. I salute them. We had to deal with the way we're dealing with immigration. We've got to deal with the way we're dealing with trade and isolationism and how we're thumbing our nose at our allies and sucking up to dictators. We've got to deal with better jobs and better wages. We've got to deal with education and the fact that this administration has chosen to take resources and protections away from public education and put them into parochial schools. Even guidances that were supposed to protect children with disabilities. We have so many issues to run on. So Democrats feel that this country has had a really raw deal under this administration as Republican-controlled Congress, that we have better ideas. We have a better idea as it relates to an infrastructure that will create jobs as well as fix our crumbling infrastructure, whether it's roads, bridges, or electric grids. We have so much work to do. Let's get together and do it. We're going to do our best to ensure that there is a respect for immigrants coming into this country and people seeking asylum. You don't rip babies away from their parents. That is cruel. We saw that in slavery. We saw that in Germany. We should not see that in the United States of America.
Let me stay on that point for 1 second, because there'll be a meeting tomorrow between the president and Republicans at the White House for immigration reform bill. Would you vote for a bill if it were to solve the problems you're talking about, but has funding for a wall?
The wall would not be the reason I would not vote. It would just not be. I don't believe in the wall. I think that the wall is unnecessary. It is a waste of taxpayers' money. It doesn't make us safer in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't stem the tide of migration of people who want to come here because they're fleeing places that are unhealthy and unsafe to them. But the wall
You'd give that up if you got everything else.
would not be enough to make me not support comprehensive immigration reform and the protection and the unification of families.
I know you've been fighting the fight against the opioid epidemic, and it is part of the problem that we have with violence on the streets, and it's torn apart families throughout New Jersey and around the country. But the problem is there seems to be so much money that's spent on this problem. Federally, in the state, and there's been so much attention for it, and we still have problems.
Well, we really do need more treatment. We need to get a better handle on who's distributing it legally or otherwise. And we need to do more education of our children and our communities. But I was concerned as well about just this whole war on drugs. The war on drugs has been a very failed effort to stem the tide of drug abuse in this country. And as a matter of fact,
just to explain to them, you sponsored a resolution about the fact that we have to go back and say we've failed here, 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 and here.
Yeah.
Just as some background, this is something you've pushed through.
I introduced a resolution that does a history of this whole war on drugs and talks about it having failed, talked about its having criminalized that which we now consider to be a public health issue, addiction. But it criminalized it and how it was a tool, a proxy for the Nixon administration, admitted by John Ehrlichman, to neutralize the impact of voters that he said were not with him, whether they're black or the so-called hippies. He couldn't say I'm against the Vietnam War. He couldn't say that I am against black folks. So they used this issue of the criminalization of drugs to be able to get at those people. So the war on drugs has disproportionately negatively impacted communities of color. Minimally, Congress should be apologizing for that. In addition to that, we should be looking at restorative justice, those people who are in prison now for things that we think are part of a public health issue. In just 2015, I think 1.5 million people were incarcerated behind a drug issue, and 80-some% of that had to do with simple possession. They don't belong in prison. They belong in treatment centers.
I'm sure you would say that as President Trump goes through all these pardons, there's some of the pardons he should be doing.
Yeah, I think that they are some of the pardons, but that's anecdotal. That's after the fact, and that's picking off one at a time. We need to engage in policies that will have an impact on cohorts that have been disproportionately and negatively impacted. And he can't see that.
Yeah, he seems to be pardoning celebrities.
Yeah, well, he's pardoning individuals thinking it's going to make a whole community like him better.
And you're talking about Jack Johnson and the woman that was pardoned because Kim Kardashian paid a visit.
Right.
One last question, and it's something that's been bugging me for a long time, and I'd love to get your answer on it. It's, we keep talking about the pharmaceutical industry and their contribution to this opioid epidemic, and there's some things that have been proven that they pushed drugs knowing that there was a problem with those drugs and knowing they'd get people hooked on those drugs. And it sounds like they even falsified some research. Why is there no criminal charges for that?
I think that there should be accountability at all levels. I think drugs that were created to deal with certain illnesses for certain periods of time should be dealt with that way. I think that there's a whole stream of distribution that we need to be looking at, from the pharmaceutical companies to the middleman to the pharmacy to the doctors that are prescribing these drugs, as well as the education that's necessary for people to understand. You can take this drug. If you have an addictive personality, you can become addicted very, very quickly. And we're not investing enough in educating as well as treating. So I think that there's a possibility for both legislation and reform from the beginning of the stream all the way down to it getting out into the hands of the user or the patient, depending upon the circumstances.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate you spending the time. Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, a Democrat from the 12th Congressional District. Jersey Matters continues right after this. Still to come on Jersey Matters, treating depression by wearing a helmet? We'll explain when Jersey Matters continues.